Hello, my name is Guy Carafone. As I mentioned in my first book overview titled Maximizing CSS Profitability, I recently retired from corporate life. Having spent most of my professional career in services finance and operations management, I decided to write a few books on maximizing services business profitability. Maximizing MPS Profitability, or Managed Print Services, is the title of this second book, which I have prepared this brief video to tell interested readers about the book. Just as with my first book, the central theme is maximizing profitability by adopting shared do's and don'ts and best practices based on real-life experiences. Similar to my first book, this book is broken down into three parts: managing business operations, managing human resources, and managing the financials. Following are chapter-by-chapter highlights. In the first chapter, we talk about MPS organizations' core business functions and corresponding best practices. MPS deal pursuit, or sales, and solution cycles are unlike most businesses. The pursuits are typically long and costly, which in some cases takes years. The solution process typically represents a host of other challenges, in particular for large deals, in which case the solution team is often forced to make undesirable compromises and unreasonable assumptions. The reason being, intense competition to win those big deals. Incidentally, the ramifications of those compromises and unreasonable assumptions, more often than not, fall squarely on the delivery team lap. Discovery is a two-step process. Pre-contract discovery, which typically involves approximately 20% of the client's environment, is critically important because it affects the solution assumptions, which ultimately affects the solution P&L. If pre-contract discovery is not a good representation of the client's entire environment, the solution P&L will be misstated. Whereas post-contract discovery is important, but has virtually no effect on the solution P&L. With regard to the design, there are three primary factors that influence the amount of time and cost involved in design. 1. The number of revisions. The more revisions, the more costly the design. 2. The more design that is done at the client site, the more costly. Remote design is less costly. And 3. The amount of direct client involvement in the design. The less the client is involved, the less costly will be the design process. Regarding deployment or transition, during this phase, the transition manager generally leads the deal team. After deployment is completed, the delivery or client manager assumes a lead role. Incidentally, transition managers must work cooperatively with clients, otherwise they will surely be replaced. They must do the same with hardware sourcing personnel, meaning being reasonable and flexible, especially regarding products that are in short supply and on allocation. Steady state support represents the longest phase of an MPS contract lifecycle, generally 5 years or more. Large deals are typically supported by dedicated account management and delivery teams, whereas small deals are typically supported remotely by shared account delivery manager and shared delivery resources. There are two major cost items that affect steady state: toner cost and on-site service cost. Therefore, how efficiently these two items are handled will surely impact profitability. Generally speaking, there are two overhead categories: people that actually do work, such as business operations personnel, and people who watch others work, such as business analysts and global functions personnel. Business operations represents a critical admin function that exists in most businesses. They are typically responsible for business processes and procedures, reporting, customer surveys, and a host of other admin activities. With regard to business analysts, the central question must be, how many of those resources can be justified on the basis of cost versus return value? Regarding global functions, they need to stick to providing regions and countries process and procedure guidelines that ensure global consistency, and not grow and morph and stop meddling with region country affairs, which is essentially guaranteed to be counterproductive. There are other aspects of MPS businesses that must also be managed, including managing clients. A fundamental question that often comes into play with MPS deals is the managed service provider, or MSP, managing the client, or is the client managing the MSP? Although relatively smaller accounts can sometimes be a handful, most are easy to manage. Whereas large or so-called strategic accounts are almost always more challenging. The primary reason? Those clients are typically masters at vendor management, meaning managing the MSP. Managing vendors. There are two primary vendor types used by MPS organizations. On-site service vendors, which are used to augment internal service or exclusively support a specific client, and resource vendors, which are used for mundane work such as doing discovery. Managing assets. There are two primary assets MPS organizations are typically accountable. Embedded hardware leases, which they have to closely manage and control the leased hardware. Otherwise, the P&L will be adversely impacted. And managing toner inventory that is located at large client sites, which is susceptible to being misplaced and or misused. Part 2 of this book is entirely about managing human resources, which the first chapter focuses on justifying human resources. Justifying existing resources, or zero-based budgeting, is uncommon in business. Regarding the justification of replacement resources, every replacement resource decision should be viewed as a potential cost reduction opportunity. And finally, justification of additional resources should be principally based on cost versus return value. In the next chapter, we talk about direct labor resource cost versus value management. Although there is typically a correlation between the number of direct resources and output, resource utilization can be further maximized with standardization, training, and streamlining business processes. And in the following chapter, we talk about indirect resource cost versus value management. In this case, the correlation between the number of resources and output should not be linear. Furthermore, it's important to point out indirect resources have varying impact on profitability, which is oftentimes exaggerated. In the last chapter of Part 2, we talk about the use of external versus internal resources. There are times when using external resources makes more sense. Although, leveraging low-cost offshore resources is not always the best choice. The reason being, there are typically a number of unavoidable challenges involved with offshoring. In Part 3, we talk about managing the financials. To be clear, this entire section of the book is about deal P&L management. There is virtually no discussion about worldwide, country, region, or for that matter, portfolio P&Ls, which represent nothing more than aggregated P&L views. The POR P&L represents the all-important contracted deal final solution P&L. Throughout the entire life of the deal, actual and forecast P&Ls are measured against the POR. With regard to POR shortcomings, especially as it relates to large deals, they often contain unattainable gross margins. The primary reason? The P&Ls include the impact of the solution team compromises and often unreasonable assumptions. Regarding POR challenges, once again, especially as it relates to large deals, they are typically hard to manage and actually achieve POR gross margin. The reason being, PORGM often includes unattainable performance stretch. Translated, that means there will be frequent account reviews done on those deals because they are not achieving PORGM. Furthermore, there will be constant pressure on the delivery and or client manager to achieve the, quote, impossible. In the next chapter, we discuss managing actual deal P&Ls, which represent both a historical view and measurement against the POR. This chapter is by far the longest chapter in the book, representing about 20% of the writing. Accordingly, it contains the lion's share of profit improvement ideas. There are 3 important points regarding actual deal P&Ls. First, reliable P&Ls start and end with financial integrity. Second, you can't fix something you don't understand, meaning source data. And third, it is essential that you have a good handle on business drivers, in which case we have a lengthy discussion regarding the following: hardware revenue and cost drivers, supplies revenue and cost drivers, and services revenue and cost drivers. Incidentally, it's important to point out a well-performing deal portfolio does not mean all the deals in that portfolio have acceptable gross margins. As a matter of fact, most times portfolios include a few lemons, so to speak. In the final chapter of the book, we talk about managing forecast deal P&Ls. Forecasting is as much an art form as it is a science. The science entails making probability assumptions, leveraging historical performance data. The art form entails applying learned skills to produce an accurate and clear view of the future. There are 2 critical aspects to forecasting: process and tools. Regarding the process, forecasting is a learned skill. Thus, you cannot simply give someone a flowchart and some basic instructions and expect them to create reasonable and sound forecasts. The person creating a forecast must possess good business acumen and have a good understanding of business drivers that affect the forecast. For example, knowing when annuity revenue streams will be impacted by hardware ads. By the way, forecasting for some businesses, for example distribution businesses, is relatively easy, whereas forecasting MPS deals is more difficult because there are many dependencies. Regarding forecasting tools, they are simply the enabler that makes creating a forecast possible. Tools can vary anywhere from basic spreadsheets to robust and integrated systems. Incidentally, the best tool does not guarantee a reliable forecast, whereas a not-so-great tool, leveraged by a skilled forecaster, will most often guarantee a reliable forecast. And finally, just as I did with my first book, I make some closing comments regarding takeaways from reading this book. Taking advantage of the many profit improvement ideas I shared is a good thing, whereas taking advantage of your clients is never a good idea. Customers expect and deserve return value for money spent on services. Once customers sense the service provider has taken advantage of them, you can say goodbye to those customers. Getting them back or finding replacement customers is guaranteed to be more costly. Be fair and respectful to all of your customers and they will be loyal in return. In service businesses, customer loyalty is one of the most important keys to success. This book is available on Amazon.com in both ebook and paperbook format. The link is included below. I also included a link to my website if you're interested in knowing about other books I have written and currently writing. Thank you.